Thank you, Eric. Good morning, Chairperson and members. My name again is Charles Rabamad. I'm the Assistant Director for Recovery, and I'm also the State Operations Center Director. As you know, the Governor's Office of Emergency Services shares the Drought Task Force, and in that capacity, we activated the State Operations Center to assist various communities for the drought impacts. We've been working diligently to address various community impacts from the drought. We've been coordinating and collaborating with state agencies and local communities for emergency food and water deliveries, improvement, expansion, and consolidation of water systems, temporary housing, and job training. As stated, we've been fully staffed since 2014 to implement objectives in support of the Governor's priorities. The way it works at the State Operations Center, the Cal-OES region, Eric and his colleagues from Southern Region and Coastal, they coordinate the daily activities with the operational areas and elevate and address any drought-related needs from the operational areas and provide feedback for needed resources and issues to the state operation centers. We take it from there, we communicate with the state agencies, and we provide any resources and assistance needed. The State Operations Center holds weekly calls with the operational areas, state agencies representatives and tribal government. They identify drought issues, discuss ongoing drought projects, and receive updates on state agencies' drought programs. The main impact is on private dry wells within various counties. As of today, we have a total of 1,988 dry wells in California. Those are reported. We know it's much more than that, but for different reasons, not all the individuals are reporting dry wells. The most impacted counties, of course, is in inland region, which Tulare County, Tuolumne, and Mariposa. They have around 1,883. In coastal region, we have around only 4 wells. In southern regions, we have around a little bit over 100 wells. The most impacted counties are Tulare with 1,221, Tuolumne County with 184, Madera with 92. As of today, the California Disaster Assistance Act worked with the counties and private nonprofits to provide state assistance for water delivery, setting up tanks, community showers, and bottled water. We provided so far about a little bit over 2,200,000. In Tulare, about a little bit under 2 million, and in Tuolumne, a little bit over 300,000. We also provided, the California Department of Social Services have provided food distribution through food banks. They distributed over 5,900 boxes through May 2015 in counties such as Kern, Tulare, Fresno, San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Monterey. Also, Department of Community Services and Development, they provided utility assistance to needed individuals. And now the Housing Community Development are finalizing their program to provide assistance for relocation costs for individuals who cannot receive or for any reason cannot receive emergency water delivery. Chairman, you asked a question about what we're going to be doing for the future. As emergency managers, we have to assume the drought will be a prolonged event. As such, we will continue the coordination and collaboration with state agencies and local communities for emergency food and water deliveries and other needs. The drought is a prolonged response and recovery operation. It's different than any other disaster that we faced in the past, such as earthquake, flood, fires. Our emergency response structure is designed to expand, to respond and recover from the prolonged drought emergencies. If needed, we will ramp up the state and regional operation centers to coordinate the extended response. Additionally, we are monitoring and evaluating the need of requesting federal assistance through a presidential declaration. This is a complicated issue, and we're monitoring very close to see when that may be able to take place and the right time and what we ask for. So that concludes my brief, if you have any questions.
No, thank you for that, and thank you for the kind of general overview of kind of what's happening. I believe Assemblymember Mathis had a question based off, if I could call you by your first name, Eric's testimony.
I know we had talked about $1.2 million being allocated for a well in the area of Porterville for helping get water out to the east side. And in your statement, you said that you were still working on the funding. So is that funding there already, or what is the status of that?
The project, as I understand it, DWR is funding the well. As I generally understand it, the funding is going to be split. The funding is coming out of the last fiscal year, and then they're looking to secure additional funding out of this fiscal year. But they're extremely confident that it's all going to come together, and we're going to get that funded. So the project's moving forward.
And Water Board provided around 600,000, 500, 600,000.
It's moving forward. They just have to figure out where they're going to pull the money from, but it's all going to come together.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. No, I had a couple of general questions overall, because I know this legislature back in March allocated close to $1 billion for drought response and emergency drought resistance. I know what was it? The Office of Emergency Services, we gave $4.4 million for the emergency operations as well. Can you tell us here in the committee how that money is being utilized to help some of these communities? I know you mentioned the food banks, you mentioned the bottled water, some of those things, but it's a lot of money, and I'm wondering, I don't know if that adds up to everything that's been allocated by the legislature.
The 4.4, if I'm correct on that, is for our operation and other state operation to respond to the drought. I believe we also been appropriated about 22 million for to support the local communities. When you ask the counties and the private nonprofits, they'll tell you that the purchase of tanks and purchase of water and delivery of water is very costly, and we're doing that because we have an emergency and we have to provide water delivery to the needed communities. We believe that by the end of by early next year, we're probably going to exceed the 10 million or 15 million for all type of water deliveries, bottle of water, and responding to any other needs, such as also providing maybe showers and other needed drought-related issues.
So, Chair, I also know that of the funding that was authorized, I think approximately $700 million of that was for large capital improvement infrastructure projects, and I think the drawdown of those funds is going to take longer than our emergency response efforts, only because of the nature of the projects. But I know when you look at our CDAA program, we're estimating spending upwards of $20 million to address needs. That's a reimbursement program. A lot of the counties and nonprofits are cash flowing it as they respond to the issues and then coming back to us. So again, we'll see some of those funds rolling out over time. But when it comes to just, and we can certainly get an accounting and provide that from other state agencies of where they are on the different appropriations that they've received. We don't have the specific accounting today, but But I know from a lot of the state water board programs we're dealing with for bottled water delivery for the connections. They've exhausted the previous year programs and are now working on the new appropriations that they've received. So on the emergency side, the funds are flowing rapidly. On the larger infrastructure projects, I think a lot of those funds are going to take longer to draw down. But the projects are certainly in play and being developed.
Okay. No, thank you for that. I think my colleagues would just like to know that there's a plan. The plan is being implemented. We know capital projects are usually longer projects, and what we're doing for vulnerable communities now in terms of the short term, the bottled water, the food banks, things like that are actually occurring. Assemblymember Frazier, please.
Thank you for your presentation today and helping the people in California that really do desperately need the help. If you had a bucket list or a wish list that would help you be more effective, could you share with our panel today what it would be?
El Nino to really come together and just soak the state there?
Other than just the obvious. In your day-to-day operations.
Yeah, I think that's something we could give some thought to. At this point, the ability for individuals to drill new wells is probably one of our most challenging issues because there's the federal funds that are available are very restrictive, and we don't have any programs on the state side at this point. So, if we were able to help folks drill new wells, that's one solution. But there again, and I know the committee's looking at the DWR information on groundwater levels and so forth. In some areas, that may not be the best solution. So, we're focused on the emergency side with what's in front of us right now and how do we use the authorities and the funding we've got to address those needs. But in many cases, if we could help folks get to those long-term solutions, I know the governor's office is looking at where we can connect more of these clusters like East Porterville and Fairmead and Madera County and other areas where we can connect those to municipal systems. That certainly would be a key that would alleviate a lot of our emergency response efforts if we were able to connect a lot of those types of communities.
So are you seeing any kind of restrictive process through LAFCOs or anything because of their purpose is not to encourage rural growth outside, designated urban limit lines and whatnot? Has that ever been an issue also?
It's probably not a question best posed to us. I don't have as good a sense on the policy side. It's not something we deal with. It's not in our wheelhouse. But I think certainly folks at the Water Board, I know Denise England from Tulare County is going to be testifying. She may be able to give you some perspective on that. But we don't, on the emergency management side, we make sure that communities are looking at those long-term solutions, but we're not necessarily directly involved in putting all the pieces together.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. No, thank you. And I know when you mentioned drilling new wells, for instance, I know that there's a huge backlog now because I talk to people up and down the valley now, and a well that, for instance, I was talking to somebody this weekend and they're telling me that to drill a well is going to cost them over $100,000, and if they wanted to rush it, it'd be closer to $1 million, right? And if they drill the well, they still don't know how that's going to be affected by the groundwater management plan that was passed by this legislature. But you had mentioned earlier in your testimony too the work that you're doing with nonprofits. That's our second panel. But how, what type of outreach is being done? Like, how is this different than other emergencies that you guys are dealing with? You guys deal with all state emergencies, but the drought is very specific. And how does that differ? And what are we doing to make sure that we're outreaching to those, Cutler or Rosies of the world or Armonas or these smaller communities that are deeply affected just because of the region and where they're being where they're located?
Sure, and I know Ms. England's going to speak to that to some degree. There's considerable outreach occurring in Tulare County that we are supporting through the CDAA program. It is part of the ability to get water for drinking and sanitation out to folks. And if they're continuing to look at other organizations, if there are other organizations that want to be part of that solution and working with Tulare County or other communities to help with the outreach specific to the program that's in place to deliver bottled water, set up tanks, if there's organizations that want to be part of that, our program allows the county to reach an agreement with the nonprofit to be a partner in that effort. So there's certainly more that can be done. There's considerable work. I've been extremely impressed with the work that Tulare County has done, specifically in East Porterville, to get information out. There's continues to be a challenge, though. You've got a demographic that is very reluctant to speak to folks from government, to work on filling out the very simple paperwork to get bottled water into their homes, because there's just a significant trust factor, which I can respect. So where there's other organizations or individuals that are willing to join with the county to be a member of the county's task force that's going out and addressing these issues, that's certainly key. On the state side, at the Governor's Drought Task Force, the Save Our Water campaign continues to expand in looking at where we can target our outreach and education resources better. There's a considerable amount of printed and radio and television collateral material that's been developed that we are encouraging more and more communities to use to make their own, so that there's not a considerable cost that they have to invest for that outreach and education. So we're continuing to fund and support local governments in expanding their outreach, while at the same time expanding our PR campaigns on the state side with the Save Our Water campaign that can be utilized by local officials.
And what kind of response are we getting? I mean, are we saving a significant amount of water through those campaigns? Has that been analyzed yet? Or, I mean, I just know what I read in the paper.
I believe the Water Board, if they haven't released it yet, will soon be releasing the latest conservation figures. I don't know what those numbers are, but I believe we are starting to see progress through the outreach and education. But, getting to that, to key conservation goals takes time. I mean, Tuolumne County is a perfect example. They were one of the first communities to implement mandatory conservation. They required very early last year, 50% conservation, mandatory conservation, because they saw that they had a very imminent emergency in front of them. And it took nearly 6 months for their residents to get to that 50% goal. So establishing those targets and meeting them does take a bit of time.
But I agree with my colleague Eric. Obtaining situational awareness at the local level has been really a challenge for us. For certain reason, the individual homeowner or renters are not reporting the impact of the drought. And we've been working with the counties on finding a way to do more outreaches and other means of getting people to report back to us and to the counties. So this has been a challenging,
I would say that one of the biggest challenges in terms of outreach and education is getting the county government structure to accept that there's a responsibility to deal with the public health and safety emergency that's occurring within their counties. And I don't want to single out any particular counties, but there are counties that have not yet made that decision at their Board of Supervisor level to give their local environmental health and emergency managers the authority to go out and establish programs that we're prepared to fund to address those needs. And so where you've got counties that are not in a position like Tulare is, they're actively educating the public on what's available to them in the way of bottled water and community showers and community tanks and so forth, then there's not, for us as emergency managers, we're not as aware of what the needs are. So we can do everything we can to be prepared to support programs and to do outreach and education on the state level, but it takes a willingness on the count of the individual counties to want to address these, especially these dry well issues.
Yeah, no, it's a flow of communication between the locals and your office, the Office of Emergency Services. We talked a lot about short-term bottled water, things like that, immediate threats that families are facing. But how exactly are you working? Because, for instance, we talked about the $700 million for capital projects. Obviously, your office isn't going to deal. Your office deals specifically with the emergency at hand right now, but we know that in some of these communities, they need those long-term solutions. So, does the Office of Emergency Services say, "This is what we've been doing short-term, but this is what, say, this should be a midterm goal or a long-term goal," and pass that on to DWR? Or how does that work between the different departments?
So, what we do is where we see that as we're in a community dealing with the emergency, when we see that there is the potential for a long-term solution, oftentimes what we will do, initially we were doing that through my office. Now with our significant investment of staff and resources in our State Operations Center that Charles runs, they're charged with bringing together that multi-agency coordination, bringing together the agencies to begin that dialogue. And so Charles can speak more to that, but it's the role of our State Operations Center to oftentimes bring those players together so that we can start that dialogue about whether there's funding at the Water Board, at DWR, to help with some of these longer-term solutions.
Yes, our funding under the California Disaster Assistance Act is contingent upon the counties and local communities to come up with a long-term solution. So it's our job, also our responsibility at the State Operations Center, to coordinate with the state agencies to ensure that the long-term solutions have been addressed. And we work very closely with local communities and counties on that issue. Now we're working with Tulare County on finding a way for a long-term solution in that area and resolve the issue with the drought in East Porterville and other communities in Tulare County.
I think an excellent example of it is the summit that Assemblyman Mathis held. I can't remember if it was last week or 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. One of the action items out of that meeting was the need for a discussion about funding of a feasibility study to help the city of Porterville figure out how they can connect East Porterville to the city of Porterville, what that's going to look like, what the system's going to look like, the funding that would be necessary. And so one of the action items that we're still working on is pulling together a meeting of Water Board folks, DWR folks, City of Porterville, the county, to begin that dialogue on that feasibility study, what that looks like, how it's going to be funded. So at the end of the day, we won't run that project, but it's our responsibility as chair of the Governor's Drought Task Force and as carrying the authorities under the Emergency Services Act of the governor to coordinate state agency response, to bring those players together to start that dialogue and then continue to track that. So it'll become a Water Board project or perhaps a DWR project, but it's our responsibility through the SOC to continue to track that as part of the drought response.
And you help facilitate all those different departments so that we can work on that, what it sounds like to me. Mentioned earlier, you had mentioned possibly relocating some folks because you can't get water out to them. I would imagine if somebody's listening or watching this hearing, if you're in a smaller community, that might sound a little scary. How is that determination made? Is it, we're not talking about uprooting entire communities with, say, a population of 1,000 people or 200 people, or
no.
What are we specifically talking about? Just to help bring some clarification.
So the Housing and Community Development Program is a housing relocation program to provide gap assistance for a 12-month period to help folks get out of a situation where they don't have a potable water source and they do not have a landlord that is willing to address the issue, and help get them out of that situation and into a home where there's a reliable potable water source. So HCD's program is really a program of last resort. The decisions on relocating individuals will be a local decision, and it'll be a decision that's likely made when all of our other avenues have been exhausted. So county is working with landlords to get landlords to step up and assume the responsibility they've got to help their tenants. But in many cases, you've got landlords that have been unwilling to even take a call from county officials to begin that dialogue. And so if we continue to have a situation where landlords are not cooperating and not willing to be partners in the solution, i.e. Getting a household tank set up, then it may come to the situation where it's going to benefit the individual to be able to relocate them into a situation where they've got a reliable potable water source. But that would be a resource of last resort.
Okay, thank you. And I believe Mr. Mathis has an additional question.
I'll jump in along with that with the, as I look at it, slumlords. I know we've had a lot of trouble and a lot of difficulty with contacting them, and it comes down to, the fact that if you can't provide water to a building, technically the building is condemned. And with the funding to move these folks for 12 months, I mean, how much outreach has actually been able to get done to make contact with these people? Is a immigration status a question with that part? And with that, I mean, is there people going out door to door to talk to the renters? And I know there's been a lot of work with local law enforcement to try to catch these guys, because I've heard horror stories of people that have paid deposits to move in and then moved in and there's no water there, and now they're out $1,000 with no water, and these guys are just preying upon these people who are in need. So, I mean, is there any steps, any direction that you see? And, I'm not boots on ground there. Unfortunately, I'm up here trying to see the technical things in the legislative process that we can do to fix this. Would you enlighten us on those programs a little bit more in depth, so that anybody watching at home can see, if I need to move out because I have a slumlord, what are the steps I need to take to be able to get out of there into this housing and help my family?
What we're talking about here is largely Tulare County, where this issue's sort of manifested itself, and I hate to continue to add Denise's punch list of things to help you with, but I think they're in a better position to address specifically what's been done. I can speak to it generally. There have been letters that have gone out to all the homes where wells have been dry. There have been campaigns to canvass the neighborhood, try to go door to door and talk to every single individual in East Porterville, and I know there's efforts in other parts of Tulare County as well. So the county has made considerable efforts to attempt to get in touch with these individuals. In terms of next steps and outreach, I think that's something that Denise could speak to better in terms of the county strategy. But again, it's, we want to have as many tools in our toolbox as possible. And as much as we would all love to be able to keep people in their homes and get them water in the short term and look at long-term solutions, if at the end of the day it's going to serve their health and safety needs better for them to be relocated, and that's a decision that the county decides they want to take, we wanted to make sure at the state level that we had a program that could support that. And so HCD's program, if it's not already online, I think in the next week or so it's going to be ready to go. And at this point, Tulare County is the only county that we're seeing where we're likely to use the program. I've got responsibility over all the Central Valley counties, and at this point, our situational awareness is indicating that there aren't any other counties where we're likely to have to do that. But the program's there and available to support.